Descartes, in the Meditations 1641, notes that there are only two ways of proving the existence of God, one by means of his effects, and the other by means of his nature or essence. The latter a priori path, represented paradigmatically by the ontological argument of St. Anselm, and its offspring, including Descartes' own version, has perennial appeal to a certain sort of philosopher, but leaves most people cold. The former, represented paradigmatically by the argument from design, is surely the most compelling of all arguments against atheism, and it apparently arises spontaneously whenever people anywhere are challenged to justify their belief in God. William Paley's example of finding a watch while strolling on the heath epitomizes the theme and leads, he says, to the inference we think is inevitable, that the watch must have a maker, that there must have existed at some time and at some place or another an artificer or artificers who formed it for the purpose which we find it actually to answer, who comprehended its construction and designed its use. Paley, 1800. Until Darwin came along, this was a respectable argument, very worthy of David Hume's corrosive but indecisive broadside in his Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion in 1779. Descartes himself subscribed to a version of the argument from design in his notorious Third Meditation argument that his idea of God was too wonderful to have been created by him. Though Descartes surely considered himself intelligent, and moreover an accomplished designer of ideas, he could not imagine that he could be the intelligent designer of his own idea of God. The familiar idea that the marvels of the universe prove the existence of God as its creator is perhaps as old as our species itself, or even older than that. Did Homo habilis, the handyman who made the first crude tools, have some dim and inarticulate sense that it always takes a big, fancy, smart thing to make a less fancy thing? We never saw a pot making a potter, or a horseshoe making a blacksmith. This trickle-down, mind-first vision of design seems self-evident at first. A creationist propaganda pamphlet I once was given by a student exploits this intuition with a mock questionnaire. Do you know of any building that did not have a builder? Yes or no. Do you know of any painting that did not have a painter? Yes or no. Do you know of any car that did not have a maker? Yes or no. If you answered yes for any of the above, give details. Blank, ... The presumed embarrassment of the test-taker when faced with this tall order evokes the incredulity of that many, probably most people, feel when they confront Darwin's great idea. It does seem just obvious, doesn't it, that there could not be any such designs without designers, any such creators without a creator? The vertigo and revulsion this prospect evokes in many was perfectly expressed in an early attack on Darwin, published anonymously in the year 1868. Quote, in the theory with which we have to deal, absolute ignorance is the artificer, so that we may enunciate as the fundamental principle of the whole system that, in order to make a perfect and beautiful machine, it is not requisite to know how to make it. This proposition will be found on careful examination to express in condensed form the essential purport of the theory, and to express in a few words all Mr. Darwin's meanings, but who, by a strange inversion of reasoning, seems to think absolute ignorance fully qualified to take the place of absolute wisdom and all the achievements of creative skill. End quote. Exactly. Darwin's strange inversion of reasoning was in fact a new and wonderful way of thinking, completely overturning the mind-first way that even David Hume had been enabled to cast aside, and replacing it with a bubble-up vision in which intelligence, the concentrated forward-looking intelligence of an anthropomorphic agent, eventually emerges as just one of the products of mindless mechanistic processes. These processes are fueled by untold billions of pointless, undesigned collisions, some vanishing small fraction of which fortuitously lead to tiny improvements in the lineages in which they occur. Thanks to Darwin's principle of descent with modification, these ruthlessly tested design innovations accumulate over the eons, yielding breathtakingly brilliant designs that never had a designer other than the purposeless distributed process of natural selection itself over billions and hundreds of millions of years. The signatures of these unplanned innovations are everywhere to be found in a close examination of the marvels of nature. in the inside-out retina of the vertebrate eye, and half-discarded leftovers in the genes and organs of every species. The prodigious wastefulness and apparent cruelty of so many of nature's processes. These departures from wisdom, frozen accidents, in the apt phrase of Francis Crick, confront the theist with a dilemma. If God is responsible for these designs, then his intelligence looks disturbingly like human obtuseness and callousness. Moreover, as our understanding of the mechanisms of evolution grows, we can sketch out ever more detailed accounts of the historical sequence of events by which the design innovations appeared and where they were incorporated into the branching tree of genomes. A voluminously predictive account of the creative process is now emerging, replete with thousands of mutually supporting details and no contradictions at all. As the pieces of this mega jigsaw puzzle fall into place with increasing rapidity, there can be no reasonable doubt that it is, in all its broad outlines, if not yet in all its unsettled details, the true story of how all living things came to have the designs that we observe. Unreasonable doubt flourishes, however, thanks to the incessant propaganda efforts of creationists and intelligent design or ID spokespeople, such as William Dembski and Michael Behe, who have managed to persuade a distressingly large proportion of the lay population that there are genuine scientific controversies brewing in biology concerning its backbone theory, evolution by natural selection. There are not, however. Genuine scientific controversies abound in every corner of biology, but none of them challenges evolution. In fact, it is one of the cornerstones of biology itself. The legitimate way to stir up a storm in any scientific discipline is to come up with an alternative theory that, 1, makes a prediction that is crisply denied by the reigning theory but turns out to be true, or 2, explains something that has been baffling defenders of the status quo, or 3, unifies two distant theories at the cost of some element of the currently accepted view. To date, the proponents of intelligent design have not produced a single instance of anything like that. There are no experiments with results that challenge any standard neo-Darwinian understanding, no observations from the fossil record or genomics or biogeography or comparative anatomy or paleontology that undermine standard evolutionary thinking, no theoretical unifications or simplifications, no surprising predictions that have turned out to be true. In short, no science, just advertising. No intelligent design hypothesis has even been ventured as a rival explanation of any biological phenomenon. To formulate a competing hypothesis, you have to get down in the trenches and actually offer some details that have testable implications. But the ID proponents conveniently sidestep that requirement, claiming that they have no specifics in mind about who or what the intelligent designer might be. To see this shortcoming in relief, consider an imaginary hypothesis of intelligent design that could explain the emergence of human beings on this planet. About 6 million years ago, intelligent genetic engineers from another galaxy visited Earth and decided that it would be a more interesting planet if there was a language-using, religion-forming species on it. So they sequestered some primates from among the ancestors of both humans and chimpanzees and bonobos, and then genetically re-engineered them to give them the language instinct and enlarged frontal lobes for planning and reflection. It worked. If some version of this hypothesis were true, it could actually explain how and why human beings differ from their nearest relatives, and it would disconfirm all of the competing neo-Darwinian hypotheses that are currently being pursued on this fascinating question. We would still have the problem of how these intelligent genetic engineers came to exist on their home planet, but we would safely ignore that complication for the time being, since there is not the slightest shred of evidence in favor of this hypothesis. And here is something the ID community is reluctant to discuss. No other intelligent design hypothesis has anything more going for it. In fact, my far-fetched but possible hypothesis has the distinct advantage of being testable in principle. We could look in the human and chimpanzee genome for unmistakable signs of tampering by these genetic engineers. Maybe they left a Kilroy was here message in human DNA for us to decode. Finding some sort of user's manual neatly embedded in the apparently functionless junk DNA that makes up most of the human genome would be a Nobel Prize-winning knockout coup for the ID gang. But if they are even looking, they are not telling anyone. They know better. Ironically, William Dembski's design inference argument is supposed to set up a surefire test for finding just such telltale signs of intelligent tinkering in the causal ancestry of phenomena. But instead of trying to demonstrate the test in action, he settles for the observation that the ID perspective encourages biologists to investigate whether systems that first appear functionless might in fact have a function, and no neo-Darwinian would disagree with that strategy. Between the richly detailed and ever-ramifying evolutionary story and the featureless mystery of God, the creator of all creatures, great and small, there is no contest. This is a momentous reversal for the ancient conviction that God's existence can be read off the wonders of nature. Anyone who has ever been struck by the magnificent intricacy of design and prodigious variety of the living world and wondered what, if not God, could possibly account for its existence must now confront not just only a plausible alternative, but an alternative of breathtaking explanatory power supported by literally thousands of confirmed predictions and solved puzzles. For example, Richard Dawkins has put the point very crisply. Although atheism might have been logically tenable before Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. Undermining the best argument anybody ever thought of for the existence of God is not, of course, proving the non-existence of God, and many careful thinkers who have accepted evolution by natural selection as the explanation of the wonders of the living world have cast about for other supports for their continuing belief in God. The idea of treating mind as an effect rather than as a first cause is too revolutionary for some. Alfred Russel Wallace, the co-discoverer with Darwin of natural selection, could never accept the full inversion, proclaiming that the marvelous complexity of forces which appear to control matter, if not actually to constitute it, are and must be mind products. More recently, the physicist Paul Davies, in his book The Mind of God, opines that the reflective power of human minds can be no trivial detail, no minor byproduct of mindless, purposeless forces. This is a most revealing way of expressing a familiar denial, for it betrays an ill-examined prejudice. Why, we might ask Davies, would its being a byproduct of mindless, purposeless forces make it trivial? Why couldn't the most important thing of all be something that arose from unimportant things? Why should the importance or the excellence of anything have to rain down on it from on high, from something more pertinent, a gift from God? Darwin's inversion suggests that we abandon that presumption and look for sorts of excellence, of worth and purpose that can emerge bubbling up out of the mindless, purposeless forces. But before we settle into the bubble-up perspective on ultimate importance with whatever comfort we can muster, we need to deal first with the residual skepticism of the traditional trickle-down perspective. Once mindless, purposeless evolution gets underway, it generates magnificent design over time. But how did it get started? Do we not need God to kindle the process by miraculously and improbably assembling the first self-replicating thing? This hope and the contrary conviction that the origin of life can be accounted for somehow by a natural series of events of low but not negligible probability grounds the intense interest, not to say passion, surrounding contemporary research on the origin of life. The details of the process are not yet settled, but the presence of fairly complex building blocks, not just amino acids and basic organic molecules, in the prebiotic world is now established, and the problem confronting scientists today is less a matter of imponderable mystery than an embarrassment of riches. So many possibilities are not yet excluded. The conviction that it must have taken a miracle, a temporary violation of the standing laws of physics and chemistry, for life to get initiated has lost whatever plausibility that it ever had. But then those standing laws themselves require an explanation, do they not? If God the artificer and God the kindler have lost their jobs, what of God the lawgiver? This suggestion has been popular since the earliest days of Darwinian thinking, and Darwin himself toyed with this attractive retreat. In a letter written in 1860 to the American naturalist Asa Gray, an early supporter, Darwin wrote, quote, "I am inclined to look at everything as resulting from design laws, with the details, whether good or bad, left to the working out of what we may call chance. End quote. Automatic processes are themselves often creations of great brilliance. From today's vantage point, we can see that the inventors of the automatic transmission and the automatic door opener were no idiots, and their genius lay in seeing how to create something that could do something clever without having to think about it. Indulging in some anachronism, we could say that to some observers in Darwin's day, it seemed that he had left open the possibility that God did his handiwork by designing an automatic design maker. And to some of these, the idea was not just a desperate stopgap, but a positive improvement on tradition. The first chapter of the biblical corpus, that of Genesis, describes the successive waves of creation and ends each with the refrain, "And God saw that it was good." Darwin had discovered a way to eliminate this retail application of intelligent quality control. Natural selection could or would take care of that without further intervention from God. The 17th century philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, for example, had defended a similar hands-off vision of God the Creator. As Henry Ward Beecher put it, quote, "Design by wholesale is grander than design by retail," end quote. Asa Gray, captivated by Darwin's new idea, but trying to reconcile it with as much of his traditional religious creed as possible, came up with this marriage of convenience. God intended the stream of variations and foresaw just how the laws of nature he had laid down would prune this stream over the eons. As John Dewey later would aptly remark, involving yet another mercantile metaphor. Quote, "Gray held to what may be called design on the installment plan," end quote. What is the difference between order and design? As a first stab, we might say that order is merely regularity, mere pattern. Design is Aristotle's telos, or a purpose, an exploitation of order for a purpose such as we see in a cleverly designed artifact. The solar system, for example, exhibits stupendous order, but does not apparently have a purpose. It is not for anything. An eye, in contrast, is for seeing. Before Darwin, this distinction was not always clearly marked. Indeed, it was positively blurred. In the 13th century, Aquinas offered the view that natural bodies, such as planets, raindrops, or volcanoes, act as if guided toward a definite goal or end, a purpose, so as to obtain the best result. This fitting of means to ends implies, argued Aquinas, an intention. But seeing as natural bodies lack consciousness, they cannot supply that intention themselves. Therefore, some intelligent being exists by whom all natural things are directed to their end, and this being we call God. End quote. Hume's Cleanthes, following in this tradition, lumps the adapted marvels of the living world with the regularities of the heavens. It's all like a wonderful clockwork to him, but Darwin suggests a division. "Give me order," he says, "and time, and I will give you design. Let me start with regularity, the mere purposeless, mindless, pointless regularity of physics, and I will show you a process that eventually will yield products that exhibit not just regularity, but purposive design." This was just what Karl Marx, for example, thought that he saw when he declared that Darwin had dealt a death blow to teleology. Darwin had reduced teleology to non-teleology, design to order. A more recent idea about the difference and tight relation between design and order will help to clarify the picture. This is the proposal, first popularized by the physicist Erwin Schrödinger in 1967, that life can be defined in terms of the second law of thermodynamics. In physics, order or organization can be measured in terms of heat differences between regions of spacetime. Entropy is simple disorder, the opposite of order in work, and accordingly to the second law, the entropy of any isolated system increases with time. And so we have increasingly disorder in the universe instead of going from order to disorder instead of disorder to order. In other words, things run down inevitably. According to the second law, the universe is unwinding out of a more ordered state into the ultimately disordered state known as the heat death of the universe. What then are living things? They are things that defy this crumbling into dust, at least for a while, by not being isolated, by taking in from their environment the wherewithal to keep life and limb together. The psychologist Richard Gregory, for example, summarizes the idea. Quote, time's arrow given by entropy, the loss of organization or loss of temperature differences, is statistical and it is subject to local small-scale reversals. Most striking, life is a systematic reversal of entropy, and intelligence creates structures and energy differences against the supposed gradual death through entropy of the physical universe. End quote. Gregory goes on to credit Darwin with the fundamental enabling idea. Quote, it is the measure of the concept of natural selection that increases in the complexity and order of organisms in biological time can now be understood. End quote. Not just individual organisms, then, but the whole process of evolution that creates them can thus be seen as fundamental physical phenomena running contrary to the larger trend of cosmic time. A designed thing, then, in geological time, is either a living thing or a part of a living thing or the artifact of a living thing, organized, in any case, in aid of this battle against disorder and entropy. It is not impossible to oppose the trend of the second law, but it is costly. Gregory dramatizes this with an unforgettable example. A standard textbook expression of the directionality imposed by the second law of thermodynamics is the claim that you cannot unscramble an egg. Well, not that you absolutely cannot, but that it would be an extremely costly, sophisticated task uphill all the way against the second law. Now consider how expensive it would be to make a device that would take scrambled eggs as input and deliver unscrambled eggs as output. There is one ready solution. Put a live hen in the box. Feed it scrambled eggs and it will be able to make eggs for you for a while. Hens do not normally strike us as near miraculously sophisticated entities, but here is one thing a hen can do, thanks to the design that has organized it, that is still way beyond the reach of the devices created by human engineers today. The more design a thing exhibits, the more research and design work had to have occurred to produce it. Minds are among the most designed of entities, and partly because they are the self-redesigning things. But this means that they are among the most advanced effects to date of the creative process, not, as in the old version, its cause or source. Their products, in turn, the human artifacts that were our initial model, must count as more designed still. This may seem counterintuitive at first. A Keats ode may seem to have some claim to have a grander research and design pedigree than a Nightingale. At least it might seem so to a poet ignorant of biology. But what about a paperclip? Surely a paperclip is a trivial product of design compared with any other living thing, however rudimentary. In one obvious sense, this is true, but reflect for a moment. Put yourself in Paley's shoes, but walking alone the apparently deserted beach on an alien planet. Which discovery would excite you the most, a clam or a clam rake? Before the planet could make a clam rake, it would have to make a clam rake maker, and that is a more designed thing by far than a clam. Only a theory with the logical shape of Darwin's could explain how designed things came to exist, because any other sort of explanation would be either viciously circular or an infinite regress.